Right, thanks everyone for attending. I'll just call the meeting to order. First of all is attendance. I believe we're all here. So there's one apologies from Councillor Mandy Owen. Any other apologies or anything else to note there? If not, then Richard, if we move on to agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Do you want to come in at this point?
Thank you, Lisa. As you will be aware, members, interest relates to issues where you are a close personal associate may have some link to a matter under discussion. I am aware this morning that Councillor Crick is on the board of directors at Llantarnam Grange Arts Centre, Councillor Jones is an observer at the Brian Evans Workmen's Hall, and Councillor Clark is a friend of the Congress Theatre. However, it is a matter for you to make declarations now. Thank you.
Can I come in then on agenda item 10 as a volunteer at Congress Theatre? I'm in an unremunerated role, I insist. Anyone else want to come in at that point?
Yes, please. My husband is on the board of the Tulvine Museum Trust.
Do members just want to confirm the points that Justine's already referred? Councillor Clark? All happy? Yeah. In which case we can move on then to agenda item 5, which is updates on actions. Oh, sorry, it's confirmation of Cabinet minutes. I'm getting ahead of myself. Confirmation of Cabinet minutes from the 9th of October. Anything to raise here? We all agree they're a true and accurate record? Yep. Okay, move on to agenda item 5 then, which is update on actions. Anything here to comment on? No outstanding actions there. Anything else people want to add to that list? Okay. We move then to item 6, which is the report on the council tax base, and I'll bring in Nigel Aurelius.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Leader. I won't be long on this report. This is standard. Every year we've got to bring a report on the council tax base for budget setting in 1920. So I'll just quickly run through the key messages in the report. We're keeping the absolute collection rate at 99%. We're one of only a handful of authorities that assume 99%, because I firmly believe all the money should be in the budget being spent on services, not kept outside the budget and boosting reserves. But we are, all members will be aware of changes to, committal and sanctions. So we just got to keep an eye on that as the year goes on. Our overall band deal got by 295 properties. For second homes, we're going to keep with the 0% discount, and for those long-term empty properties, we're keeping with the care leavers defined discount that came in last year, and we'll continue to publish all our information electronically rather than all the paper stuff that goes with the bills. I don't think there's much more to say on the report, Leader. It's the standard report we get every year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. I'd like to repeat that point he makes about the 99% assumed collection rate. I think that's the right thing to do by services, putting them first rather than looking to boost our own reserves. And also welcome in 3.1 the continuation of the local discount for care leavers. I think that's something that we led on as a council, one of the first in Wales to do that, and I think that's right that we give those people who've had a tough, challenging start in life a bit of a break as they try and enter the world of being an independent adult. So I welcome that. Any comments to make from other Cabinet members? Are we all happy then to approve the recommendations of the report, which are on page 21, that the council tax base as detailed in the report be approved for properties in prescribed classes A and B, i.e. second homes? The council continues to apply a nil discount. Point 3, for properties in prescribed class C, empty properties, the council continues to apply a nil discount. Point 4, that a policy in respect of the locally defined discount for care leavers continues to be adopted until further notice. And point 5, that the electronic supply of information that accompanies the demand notice is utilised. Are we all happy in favour of that? No objections. That report is carried. So move swiftly on to Item 7 then, which is the budget update reports. Do you want to come in first on this, Nigel?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Standard report you get at this time of year, but one or two changes. Just cantering through the report. First thing to bring out in the key messages. I mean, our overall like-for-like settlement increase, cash increase of 0.1%, but is very small when you consider it against the £8.5 million worth of overall pressures we're facing. The first part of the report then updates us on the monitoring position as at the end of September, and there'll be nothing particularly new in here for members. The biggest pressure area, as we've reported all year, is in relation to social care and housing, and particularly children's services. It's moved again this month because of an additional 6 placements. It's the nature of the service. So that follows through, obviously, then into budget planning for 1920. I don't think we're unique as an authority in terms of having pressures in children's services. In terms of neighbourhood services, the key pressure there that keeps moving is in relation to Torvine training. And there's an awful lot of management activity taking place to address that situation. And unlike children's, that doesn't follow through in the same way into 1920 because of the management activity that is being taken. The resources has improved from the previous one. The corporate mitigations haven't changed, and there's some other favourable variances in the other. There's just a note at the end of that section about funding from corporate reserves in relation to a staffing agreement. So then the main bulk of the report goes on to the provisional settlement and where we are with the budget for 2019-20. Overall, there was a cash reduction, average all Wales reduction of 0.3% for the local government sector, and they did establish a floor at -1%. And I think there were 6 authorities on the floor at 1%. There were some headline grant announcements, but no really specific detail. Health Service obviously received the significant bulk of the money, all of the Barnet consequentials, and despite us making the point that it should be the health system rather than the health service, it still seems to be the health service, with social care sort of coming along behind, and yet actually greater investment in social care and the preventative agenda would actually help the health service probably more than lots and lots of extra resource. A lot of lobbying going on from local government at the moment in relation to the settlement, and we're all aware that we're first in the queue for any extra resources, and obviously between the provisional and the final, we've had the UK government budget announcement where there were some consequentials coming through, so there are some choices to be made. Our uplift, like for like, was -0.1. It's very unusual for us to be on the upward curve of the settlement, and it's almost entirely down to free school meals and driving up the free school meals number because it has such a big impact on the funding. I make reference to the fact that the narrative with the settlement referred to extra resources for education and social care within the unhypothecated settlement, which I find hard to really sort of evidence in terms of, when you've got such a marginal increase and most authorities have got a cash decrease, it's hard to argue it's extra resources. It's extra only measured against a very difficult forward indication. And the last part of the provisional settlement, I've indicated what I've included in our draft settlement response, which is going off today in relation to the provisional settlement. And it ends with, I hope there is some significant movement between the provisional and the final, otherwise stark choices will be faced. Some commentary in the report then on specific grant allocations. In essence, we've got no detail on the headline grants that they've announced with the settlement, and we've still got a number of grants where we don't know the actual sums. I think in Welsh Government at the civil servant level they recognise the difficulty that gives us, but the bottom line, this is about ministerial announcements between now and the end of March, and there's little we can do about it. The next part of the report takes you through where we are in terms of the budget. The budget policy can be summed up as we're asking everyone for either 1 or 2% mitigations to start with. Schools were receiving cash protection and funding for additional pupil roles, and then any pressures identified through the MTFP or over and above the MTFP had to be addressed by services, because we were taking a very one-year approach in 1920, recognising two things. One, we want time for the transformatory programme to be developed properly and be confident of what it's going to yield. But two, there's such uncertainty between the provisional and the final, and what it actually means for our medium-term financial plan going forward. Because whatever the final settlement ends at as becomes the new benchmark for future years. We've assumed -1 going forward. Well, if it becomes a cash flat line, that'll take £4 million off the future year forward projections beyond 1920. So for those reasons, it's 1 year focus at this point in time. All services identifying the 1 and 2%, and as a cabinet, we've started discussing those, and I'm assuming those are going to be delivered. I referred in the key messages when we looked at the first draft estimates, the initial gap to control total, £8.5 million. When you take the schools out of that, and in terms of schools, that's them getting the passported money for teachers, the increasing pupil roles money and their pressures, the gap that the rest of the authority is trying to address is around £5 million. I've then made some assumptions around the social care grant, council tax base, and we're looking at about £3.5 million then as a challenge to the rest of the council, and I've detailed the numbers there for each service and the reasons. I've met with every chief officer, and everyone is identifying mitigations to come back to those sums, so that we get a balanced position for 1920. The service which will be the most challenging for us undoubtedly will be social care and housing, and again it's because of the children's demand. But all other services, are coming to a balance. I make a point with 7.6 about some things that were in the current budget which aren't being delivered, and how we are going to deal with them within the 1920 budget. And then I summarise it in 7.9 in terms of the mitigations we're asking of all services, combined with the 1 and 2% and the pressures over and above the MTFP services in aggregate, excluding schools, are looking at about £4.3 million of the mitigations, which is not an insignificant sum of absorbing pressures. So once again, even with the comment I've made about social care, the discipline that everyone tries to bring to the budget process, it is bearing fruit again for Torvine. And even after that, we've still got £750,000 which we've got to wrestle with. In obviously looking to address that position, we've got the final council tax base. You've just had a report on that. Potential for fees and charges, the final settlement, and your ultimate council tax level, of course. Now, normally at this point in the budget cycle, there would be a package of mitigations attached here, which you would agree, which would then go into scrutiny pre-Christmas. But this year the decision has been made, because there's such fluidity, because we need the final settlement, because we need a full package of measures. If you remember last year, the pay award came at towards the back end of Christmas and threw it out by £1 million. We've suggested that scrutiny takes place in January, and then the decisions that Cabinet will take, you will take them in January and February, so that scrutiny will be a proper process, and if scrutiny raise concerns in January, they can be considered at the February Cabinet if they can't be considered at the January Cabinet. But it just means it'll be a whole package rather than a fragmented approach. A small comment on capital, and then some next steps. And there's the recommendations. Thank you, Leader. Okay.
thank you, Nigel, and thank you to you, to Dave, and the other chief officers in the council for really getting into this challenge in the right sort of spirit and with the right mentality. I think of trying to work together to resolve the problem rather than setting parts of the council off against each other. And I'm very keen that that's the sort of the principle we use to take this going forwards. We can't underestimate the challenge, the pressure of £8.5 million that you noted. That's just to keep services running. That's not to make the improvements we'd all want to make to services. That's just to keep the show on the road. Demand in children's services, social care, continues to be something that presents us with a real challenge. Also this year we've got pay award that causes pressure as well in the system. I think sometimes people underestimate the fact that we've been able to keep the show on the road for as long as we have in a situation of austerity because of the sacrifices made by people who work for public services. Their pay is down, I think, by around 21% in real terms since the start of the decade, and that's had a real impact both on their lives but also on our budgeting situation. Now that there are pay awards back in the system, I think it's sometimes underestimated the difference that makes to the challenge that faces us in making the books balance. We are continuing to put the case very strongly to Welsh Government. We're making some progress, and it's a work in progress. But you know, the point we're making very strongly is that the situation that we face it is about the preservation of core public services and the importance of that. We will make whatever savings we need to make the books balanced, to safeguard services, but we'd be lying if we said that was easy, especially in the 8th year of austerity. And the reality is that this year will be the most difficult year for local services in living memory. And I think I say that very specifically, and I word that very carefully, because this is about local services. This isn't about local government. Sometimes I think we suffer because in both the discourse within different levels of government and politics and in public, there's a battle between the health service and the services that we run as if it's a choice between doctors and nurses and patients and bureaucrats on the other hand. That's not what the call is on money. It's schools, it's social care, it's vital community services. So I think that's important that we emphasise that. And it's important also that we emphasise how vital those services are in prevention and early intervention. The Welsh Government quite rightly puts those at the top of the tree when it comes to the Welfare of Future Generations Act, wanting to make decisions for the long term, not the short term, wanting to make decisions that make our public realm more sustainable for future generations. Local government is key in achieving that. The other point that we've been making within that lobbying is that we really do need to aim higher than just being a bit better than in England. Across the border we've seen many local services completely decimated or handed out wholesale to the private sector, to the highest bidder to run, and councils meeting a few times a year to dole out contracts. I don't want that to happen, not just because I don't think that's a good deal for the people who work to provide those public services, but because I don't think it's a good deal for the people who rely on those public services in the longer term. Very often you can make quick savings that come at the cost of long-term provision. So I really think we need to aim higher than just being a bit better than England. We need to aim to preserve the public services that our people deserve into future decades. I'll end by saying that austerity is a bit like pulling an elastic band, and as we enter the 8th year of pulling that elastic band, we've had to pull it a bit tighter every year. The first couple of pulls you can get away with. It doesn't take too much strain to pull the elastic band wider, and the elastic band's unlikely to ping back in your face. But after the 7th or 8th time that you stretch it, sooner or later it's going to give way. Sooner or later things are going to start to break. Both in terms of services starting to fall over and in terms of so much of our energy being taken in sorry to extend the metaphor beyond this breaking point to talk literally. But so much of our effort, I think, is taken with trying to make those savings that could otherwise be spent on the basics of running those services. So I really would say, again, that if we want local services to survive as we know them and as we love them and as people rely on them, austerity has to end in reality and not just at the dispatch box of the House of Commons. We really need to give public services a break, both for the people who work in them and the people who rely on them. And we'll continue to lobby both, in this place and outside to get the deal that public services deserve. Can I bring anyone in at this point? To look at the recommendations then, which are on page 29. The recommendations are that the position outlined in respect to the 2018-19 revenue forecast is noted, that funding is provided from corporate reserves as per paragraph 4.3, and that the current position in relation to the 2019-20 budget is noted. Are we all happy with that recommendation? Show of hands in favour? Thank you very much, Nigel. If we close that report, and before I need to sneeze, move on to agenda item 8, which is the British Master Plan and Preferred Remedial Approach, and I'll bring in Dave Leach at this point. Alan first.
And as cabinet members will be aware, for our community and our second, the future use of the British has been of much concern and consternation over the last 30 years. This uncertainty was alleviated in a big way by our decision 2 years ago to purchase the site through our own and Welsh Government capital funding. This has allowed us to have a different conversation with the community to allow the development of a vision and master plan which delivers on a local aspiration and also delivers on a long-term sustainable well-being for our communities. Just to remind members, there were 8 objectives outlined in the Council report of 2016, which have steered and guided the work to date and will continue to do so for the future. 1 is manage worst health and safety hazards, strengthen community aspirations for future generations, support health and well-being, green infrastructure and access to the environment, enhance environmental resilience and biodiversity, unlock opportunities for private, third sector investment, jobs and growth, unlock potential opportunities for future housing development, unlock potential opportunities for green energy, protect and promote heritage. I am pleased that the master plan that is in front of you today, Dave Leach, who has led this project on the Council's behalf, will go through the report in more detail. But the one thing I am most pleased about is the continued engagement which has taken place. Engagement and partnership working can be hard, and managing expectations is a fine art. We would openly acknowledge that the development of this master plan has not been plain sailing. Given this complexity, nor should it be. We acknowledge that at times there have been stark differences of opinion, but this has only added to the value of the final product that has emerged. I have to give 2 thanks. One to the British Liaison Group. They have been invaluable partner, one to the British, I mixed up there. They have been a valuable partner and have truly held us to account and have led the engagement work with the community. Also, Clean Up Review and Scrutiny Committee. The proposals and the process were well scrutinised prior to this coming before us today, demonstrating that this project we can hold best practice in terms of engagement and governance. I'll now hand over to Dave Leach, who can talk us through the main parts of the report and its recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor, for introducing it. So, to put this briefly into context, then, since buying the British site 2 years ago, officers have been working on 4 interlinked pieces of work. The first of these is a monitoring schedule, essentially how we manage the hazards now. Second is a management plan, how can we get the community involved in the management of the site. And the third and fourth are the ones that this report relates to. That's the design of the remediation works. This is a project to remind members to tackle the worst of the hazards on the site, particularly sections of watercourses that are running in badly damaged culverts, and the highest priority mine entries as well. And finally, the master plan, which pulls all of these different components together. The remediation works and the master plan have to go hand in hand, and that's why they're linked together in this report. For example, the extent of works that we can do to the water, the route of the watercourses, will obviously have a bearing on what land uses can take place in different places. Moving on to the key messages then. The concept for the remediation works is the first point that I wanted to talk through. This is set out in section 5.1 of the report, and that sets out the preferred remediation concept that's been presented to us by the consultants that we've been working with. I think it's safe to say we've worked with the community and with partners to thoroughly assess the reports on constraints and opportunities as they've come through from the consultants. And what that's allowed us to do is keep prioritising our proposed works all the way through. So it's been an iterative process for us. And it's clear from the engagement work that we've done that flood risk and water management are the greatest concern amongst partners and certainly within the community that we've been speaking to. And that's reflected in the proposed scheme that's come forward here. Appendix 1 shows this in more detail. In summary, our watercourse works are now going to focus on the eastern side of the site. That's the Blaengavog stream, bringing as much of that as possible up into surface channels. One of the key elements that's come out of the engagement work as well has been a desire to see certainly 2 ponds built into that scheme. That's been identified as a high priority in our community engagement work. That's something we've built into the concept, so we're going to deliver that as best we can. Moving on to the mine workings then, the second major element of the remediation. We've had extensive discussions with the community through our engagement activities on this, and because of that we've actually challenged our advisors a little bit to give us a robust justification for which mine entries are actually looking and recommending that we treat here. As a result, they've refined the long list of mine entries that we'd originally had down to 27 high priorities. They're in Appendix 2 of the report. They're the ones that are the highest priorities and the highest risk for us to look at treating. And it provides that better balance then between the flood management and the mine entry work. The budget and the remaining hazards that will need to be managed and monitored then have also been updated to reflect that concept, and that's laid out in the report. And the next steps for us on the remediation side is the technical design of that watercourse. Now, we've got broad agreement as to the concept and the route. We now need to do the detail of that to be able to put a planning application in. Now that we've got a clear remediation concept as well, that's allowed us to understand the constraints, so we've been able to start that master planning process for the site. And one of the things that's reflected in the report, it's really clear that residents have a really strong passion towards what happens on the future of the British. And there's been some great, really positive ideas coming forward from that engagement work. So what we've tried to do is harness that from the start of the master plan design, essentially. So we ran a series of workshops out in the community, engaging people in setting the vision for the site at the start. What do they see the future of the site being in a sentence, essentially? And through that process, we've come up with a sustainable community that reflects the dramatic natural landscape and preserves and protects the wealth of historic character that's on the site. And that really has been a driving force then for the projects that have come out of the master plan. From that point on then, we collected all of the ideas that came from the community and from other partners, and we've pulled these together to come up with a shortlist essentially of land uses and projects. We've then done scrutiny sessions with the community to test how well they feel that they fit with that vision that we're looking to achieve, and that's pulled together into an holistic master plan that's been presented in the report today. So that's shown in Appendix 3, and essentially it's comprised of a series of projects that when you build them together work to deliver that master plan. We then went back out to the community and essentially said, this is the master plan that we've worked together to come up with. These are the highest priority elements that have come from that engagement. What do you think about it? The master plan was very well received. Over 70% of the responses raised no concerns at all. And a further 24% were largely positive, with 1 or 2 specific reservations about key elements. Interestingly, the highest priority elements of the master plan were a heritage trail around the ironworks, a landscape corridor, and the green energy generation projects. So that gives us a bit of a focus as to where to look to start delivering key elements of this in future then. And just to remind members that the master plan is required as part of the planning application for the remediation work. So if this report is approved, that will be the next step for us, is to take it towards that planning application process. We will need to do further viability testing of the master plan through that process and through integration with the local development plan as well. So that will be key as a next step for us. And then through the engagement sessions that we've done, we have been clear to the public that this does need to go through a formal planning process. That may result in changes to this master plan, but we'll bring it back out to the community if that happens, to make sure that people are comfortable with any of the changes. And then it's on to the recommendations.
I just want to give thanks to Dave for the incredible work he's done on this project. It's unbelievable what he's done. Thank you, Dave.
Dave?
Yep. The main entries that you referred to and the problems inherent in dealing with that. Who are the mine owners? Is there a residual responsibility on their part? And if that's the case, how are you dealing with that? And what do we get out of it?
So the vast majority of the mine entries are owned by the Coal Authority on the site. They have responsibility for making sure that those mine entries are kept safe. But essentially, from their point of view, that may be as simple as putting some fencing up. What we've had to align is how those mine entries impact on the master plan. So whilst preventing entry may be acceptable for a site that's not being used, and that would be acceptable in the Coal Authority's view, if we're encouraging activity to go closer to those mine entries, we need to look at working through that. There are a small number on the site that are likely to be in the council's ownership, and they're high priority ones for treatment. The only ones that may be in the council's ownership that aren't high priority for treatment are because they're either buried underground, they're not in areas that are accessible, or they're covered by quite dense vegetation.
So, just to pursue, the residual responsibility of the mine owners, in this case it would be the National Coal Board, presumably, or do as well. Their responsibility in terms of a financial responsibility or any other kind of responsibility begins and ends with some kind of superficial protection for the public from access to the mines. But there's nothing structural in terms of what we're planning there. There's no responsibility on their part to contribute to financially or any other way to that project.
No, that's correct. There's no responsibility on their part. We are working very closely with the Coal Authority, though, to see if there's some joint projects that we can do. I think they are mindful of the impact of mining on the area. And we're certainly looking at things around the green energy agenda to see if we can start using any of the mine workings from a green energy perspective. So whilst they aren't making a direct contribution to the project for the remediation works, we are looking at other avenues with them.
Can I just start with agreeing with what Alan said, really, as someone who's been involved with this, you know, from the point of time when we decided to purchase the site. This was never going to be an easy thing, but I think you've done a fantastic job taking this forward. And I say that because there's a number of factors that on their own would be tricky to deal with, but combined have made this a real test of your mettle and of everyone's mettle who's dealt with it, really. The need to balance the financial realities, and that we haven't got all the money that we'd like to do everything we would want to do with the site, the technical demands and the risks that are involved with the site, the plethora of, I hate the word, but stakeholding organisations who all have an interest. Sometimes they align with each other, sometimes they don't. That makes things difficult. And of course the feelings of an enormous number of people who care greatly about the site, and I'd include myself in that the site of the British really has the potential to be one of the jewels in the crown for us locally. It's been controversial for so many years when it was sort of banked by different organisations, basically, and sort of left in abeyance and really left to sort of, in some ways decay, but in other ways be reclaimed by nature. And there's always been a lot of suspicion about what would happen to that site, and I hope that we can have been part of maybe putting some of those suspicions to rest and getting to a position where there is a viable future for the site as a whole as something that will be of great value to people who live in the area. So I would like to thank you for your efforts in that, because many officers can deal with one of those aspects, either the technical, the small p political, the public, the financial, but trying to align them all, I realise is a very big effort on your part, and shows considerable skill on your part, so thank you. I'm very glad that the engagement has led to ideas. The engagement's not always been easy, of course, because people have different perspectives and different expectations, and we, of course, have to try and be sort of realistic and not get people's hopes up when we can't deliver on those, because, you know, that's worse than lying to people, you know, trying to sort of get hopes up that can never be realised, but also to try and work to see what we can do rather than adopting an attitude of just saying what we can't do. I think that's important, and I'm glad that the engagements led to ideas and a plan that we can take forward. I would like to thank, as well as thanking yourself, all the people who've played a part in this, the liaison group. I know it's not always been easy for them, because they have to deal with public expectations and concerns and suspicions on one hand, and then work with us as they can on the other hand, and that's not easy. It's very easy for these groups just to fall into oppositionalist perspectives as opposed to working constructively, and they have worked constructively with us, and I hope that can lead to something that we're really proud of in the future. I remember a time when one of the local members, Gunnar Clark at the time, and a cabinet member at the time as well, came up with me to London to meet with people who wanted the earth for the site, the £7 million, I think, at the time, and you know, at that time I remember thinking that, you know, Gunnar said that would it be dealt with in her lifetime, and I said I don't know, it would be dealt with in mine. I'm glad that we've moved from that situation of almost despair and a lack of hope to one that, yes, is challenging, but that we can try and work together to sort of bring a more positive resolution. So I think that's a lot of people I'm in debt to for that, but yourself certainly would be at the head of that list, so thank you. Are we happy now to move to the recommendations on the reports? They're on page 42 and 43. That Cabinet approves the draft master plan for the British, subject to any changes required by the planning process. That we note the preferred remediation approach and proposed works, and that we note the reprofiled budget. Are we happy to agree with the recommendations? Great, thank you.
Thanks, Ian.
The next item then is item 9. Let me just open this up on my computer, which is a report on increasing recycling. I'll bring in Fiona first.
Thank you, Leader. Recycling and waste is one of our corporate priorities. Residents are to be thanked for their efforts in recycling, many of whom are fully engaged, hence our current recycling rate, which is at 60%. This is something really positive, and I'm really pleased to see, but frankly we need to do better. We need to address those people who would prefer not to engage with our recycling services and simply take their unsorted waste to the Household Waste and Recycling Centre in New Inn. We need to do better to increase and improve our county's environmental performance. We need to reduce how much we spend on treating residual waste so we can invest those funds into our priorities. And we want to avoid the threat of any Welsh Government penalties. If we don't hit the 64% in 2019-20, then this will result in fines being implemented. We were at 63%, but changes to the wood recycling definitions hit us by 3%, so we now have to find 4% rather than 1%. So that is quite a significant jump. Therefore, based on positive feedback and experience from other local authorities, we are proposing that when a householder visits our Household Waste and Recycling Centre in New Inn with a black bag, they will be asked to open that bag up and recycle all that can be recycled. Other authorities that have implemented this scheme advise us that they've seen a significant reduction in their black bag waste collection at their Household Waste and Recycling Centres, ranging from 82 to 95%. I went to Swansea to watch operatives doing this study and studied them closely to see how they interacted with the public. I spent a lot of time talking to the public about the scheme, and I was reassured by the responses. I believe this will be successfully implemented here and make a real difference. We need to create a good sorting station, and this will be done in the next few months with funding from existing budgets. Training of operatives is critical, and officers will work closely with the FCC, that's the company that run our household recycling centre, to ensure that they're fully trained and can be sensitively and positively engaged with our residents. I reassure Cabinet that residents, if they come to the Household Waste and Recycling Centre with any sensitive waste, such as hygiene materials, in their black bags, then they will be dealt with appropriately and sensitively. In the long term, we hope that we can see an increase in recycling at the curbside as well, as people come to realise that they must engage with the recycling services and opportunities that are available, and they're not able to then hide their recycling waste in black bags and then take them to the centre. Over the last 2 years, we've seen a 20% increase in black bag waste delivered to our household waste and recycling centre. An analysis of that waste has shown 70% of it can actually be recycled at the site, which I think is quite an astounding figure. I believe that a proper, robust communication plan and engagement plan, which I want to allow 3 months for, we'll see a real difference in our recycling. Modelling undertaken by officers is that we will achieve at least 3% and also provide a significant savings of £80,000 to the medium-term financial plan. I don't need to reiterate, obviously, how important that is. Therefore, I support the report and the recommendations for Cabinet approval.
Okay. Rachel, do you want to?
I'm not sure I can add anything to that, Councillor Cross. I just think, to reassure members and to Cabinet, we will be engaging really closely with FCC on the training of the operatives. It will be a joint effort. Communications is absolutely critical. We'll be looking at, putting signage up at the site so anybody who uses it in the next 3 months is prepared. Obviously, there will still be those who still come up for the first time, particularly during the spring months as they start doing their garden, etc., to come forward, but the training is essential. Communications through press releases, signage at the site and through social media, almost like a bit of a countdown, will be done to raise the awareness. We know the first time it can happen for those people, it can be a shock, which is why the training then of the operatives, obviously the first couple of weeks, our staff will also be down there supporting them to make sure it's running as smoothly as possible. Okay.
I accept that point about the need for sensitivity, both in terms of training of the staff and at the site, but this strikes me as pretty vital and unavoidable, both in financial terms, that we don't want to pay fines, and in moral terms, because if some of our residents are making the effort to recycle, and a few are not bothering to, and potentially putting us all in for costs, both in terms of dealing with the residual waste and in the fines, then we have to say that's not acceptable. And also, look, no one wants to live next door to a refuse site. And if you don't want to live next door to a landfill site, if you don't want to see our oceans scattered with plastic and whatever else, then we need to recycle more. We need to bring that rate up. So I'm supportive of this, and I'd certainly move the recommendation at page 74 that we approve the implementation of the revised operational procedure at the Household Waste Recycling Centre, so residents are required to sort their black bag waste to increase recycling. Anyone else want to come in before we move that?
Just a quick.
Yeah.
I was interested in the training of these operatives, and I can well understand the urgent need for training in terms of communications. This is vital. Is there any other aspect of the whole process that needs training for these people, or is it merely the central issue of communications and sensitivity in that sense?
Obviously, at the site, FCC will have a full training programme in place for operatives anyway, in terms of engagement, communications, health and safety, what can be recycled, what can't. So that'll be just part of their normal business as usual. This obviously is additional now to that. It was always part of their contract and their tender submission when we did appoint them a few years ago. So this is additional, so there will be special training put on for those operatives so that when the scheme goes live, we're confident and they're confident that they're ready to deal with, some of the behaviours they may encounter. There is unfortunately sometimes, conflict on the site. It can be busy. People will want just to go and to leave their waste, and this will be about just how we make sure traffic flows, people still feel supported, but we're doing it in the right way to encourage the recycling. So that's the nature of the training that we've done over the next few months to make this a success.
Who else? Are we happy to go with the recommendations then at the bottom of page 74? Show of hands. Thank you. That report is carried. We then move on to agenda item 10, the funding reductions to cultural venues. Brilliant, Alan, at this point.
I do not need to remind Cabinet of the financial pressures that are facing us, as Nigel in his report earlier reminded us of what we as a collective have to face. When we were designing and deciding on the 2018-19 budget process, there was an expressed view by us, Cabinet, that we would look at reducing funding from arts within the county. We also made a commitment to reduce funding to third sector bodies. So this report seeks to reconcile and contribute to both these policy decisions. I think I can speak safely on behalf of all of us that we value and appreciate the arts and roles of all our partners within the community. We recognise that the organisations named in this report, the Green, the Theatre and the Workmen's Hall, are valued assets and have much social capital within the borough. They provide opportunities for employment, for people to volunteer, to learn new skills, and the provision of arts is vital for personal and societal well-being. You only have to visit these organisations to see the talent that Torfaen has. Productions at the theatre are a sellout. The art that is created at the Grange and exhibitions which are put on are truly of an amazing standard, and the range of activities put on at the Workmen's Hall are incredible. In an ideal world, this report would not be put before you today, but I recognise that we need to reduce our expenditure in line with our corporate priorities. What we have tried to do in consultation and liaison with the bodies is like we did with the museum, give a longer-term commitment and a trajectory of funding reduction. We have often had the conversation of what we stop funding altogether. I acknowledge that there are very few arts and creative spaces which are fully self-financing. Even our city's art is subsidised. I have been convinced by the bodies that if we stop funding altogether, their activity would end. Given arts linked to demonstrating a growing and vibrant community, I therefore want to give our citizens now and the next generation the opportunities to pursue their passion and find their talent. That is why I hope these reductions, whilst I know will be difficult for the funding bodies, will give them sufficient time to look at other sources of income and funding models to allow these bodies to continue to thrive. I therefore commend the reduction as proposed in the Cabinet report. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but if you have any questions, I'll hand you over to Rachel.
Rachel, do you want to?
I think, as Councillor Jones has said, we have engaged with the bodies separately to understand their business, to work with them on a profile which, whilst we know is challenging, still allows them to continue. We will continue that engagement over the next 4 years. It just doesn't stop with this. I will say to Cabinet, we don't have an arts manager within the team or the council anymore as part of the restructure. But we have made a commitment that we will still, through the funding liaison, still have a relationship with them, understand their business, and try and work with them on new opportunities as they come through. As we said, we know this isn't ideal. We've tried to be fair and transparent with all the bodies that we fund, and I do believe a 4-year pattern, whilst we might not have a 4-year settlement, is only fair to those bodies to allow them to plan.
I'd like to just come in on that particularly final point. Many moons ago I had the regeneration portfolio and these bodies were cut year after year, but with no certainty. I also sat many moons ago on the Congress Theatre Board, so it was cheek by jowl, no pun intended, cheek by jowl each year. But we're giving 4 years now, and exactly as you say, it would be nice to have a 4-year plan ourselves, as much as Nigel gives us as much advance warning as he can. So it gives them certainty, and it gives them the resilience now to plan And with your continued support, I think you're in a better situation than budget cut each year and not knowing what next year will be. They can look to the long term and get the grant aid from other organisations or income from other sources. So whilst in an ideal world, as the Cabinet member said, we wouldn't be making this decision, we're in the world that we are. And I think as such I will support this report.
If I can just come in, as a member of the board at Llantarnam Grange, the chairman has passed on to me, really, comments thanking you for what you've done, because so many groups and other funding bodies don't give this time, and it does give people a chance to plan and look for alternative sources, and they greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, I'd like to commend this report as well. I'm impressed with the way in which the research behind this in terms of the detail has been undertaken. My understanding is that there's been a degree of cooperation with the bodies that you talked to as well, and they understand, and if they understand, it's in major part because the communications, the delivery of what your intention is has been clear and comprehensible. I often think that those people that we serve, and quite rightly, sometimes are aggrieved at the cuts that we have to make, are aggrieved only because they live in a world of ought, not in a world of is. We live in a world of is, and those cuts that we have to make and those pressures that we have to relieve are sometimes a little unpalatable. But I think what's been achieved in this particular project is a happy, almost symbiotic relationship between ought on the one hand and is on the other hand, because a 4-year deal in the context of us looking at our budgets on an annual basis and ways and means of cutting this and cutting that, I think it's a pretty significant achievement.
I think Councillor makes a very valid point there. The relationship and the discussions with these bodies has been truly, inspiring. They have really understood the positions which we find ourselves in. It's been very mature, and it's about looking at opportunities and planning for the future, and then realising the situation we're in, and I think so. We've got to give thanks to them as well for for this being able to bring this report forward, which whilst it's not good news, is still in a positive fashion as well. So I've got to give credit to the 3 organisations.
No, I'd echo that and thank them for their input. And I would reassert the point that Fiona and everyone else has made, that we do value the work these organisations do. We value the contribution they make to our communities. And we wish we weren't in the position that we're in, because we don't want to make savings from organisations like these, but austerity forces that upon us. And in that context, I think it's right that we work with them to see what they can manage with, rather than unilaterally withdrawing funding. I think the gradual aspect of it does give them some certainty and some time to adjust whilst preserving their facilities. And I'd like to thank you for your approach on that, and for that commitment to carry on engaging with those organisations. We are where we are, but at least we can try and work together to try and weather the storm of funding that we're facing. So it's appreciated. Anyone else want to come in before I move to the recommendations? No. The recommendations then are on page 86. That members approve the reduction to core funding of cultural venues over the next 4 years, as detailed in item 6. Happy with that? Okay. Thank you. That's carried. Right, then move to agenda item 11, which is the Gwent homelessness strategy. Bring in Dave Daniels to start here.
Sure. We've got Elka coming down to give you the technical details, but the headline is that it's a statutory duty that's placed on us as a council to conduct this sort of review every 4 years. It's done on a regional basis because we got agreement with our fellow Gwent authorities that this would be a better collaboration. We'd be more effective working together. It's an extensive document. I mean, it's a hefty document, but there's an awful lot in there. Just going through it in the run-up to this meeting, there's an awful lot to take from it, and action in some cases. So it talks a lot about the challenges that we face, the good practice that we do, the good practice that other councils do, so it's helpful to see what other people are doing, so that we're talking to each other and transferring good practice. There's a lot of challenges in there which I can't help but focus on, but I will also have focus on our good practice. But you know, it's the stuff that we've talked about again and again, which is welfare reform, ongoing austerity, and lack of priority, which is a difficult thing to say, but it's lack of priority by successive UK governments around housing. That is the legacy that we're left with at the moment. This is what we're grappling with now, and it's all sort of come home to roost at once. Locally, if you're looking at the document, we have particular challenges around land availability, where we can build suitable land that we can build for social housing as opposed to private. We've got a critical shortage of 1-bed and 2-bed properties, which the team will know, be acutely aware of. And we've got at the present we've got 2,700 people on the housing waiting list, which is a big challenge. We've also got a difficulty that the land availability is leading to us finding it difficult to build social housing at the rate that we need to. So that needs to be looked at. I will be meeting with fellow partners in the next few days, actually, to talk about that specifically, because I think this needs a concerted focus going forward. Because both those issues that we're facing locally are all centred on the availability of suitable properties. I'm very wary about simple answers, but in this case, it is a big part of the solution. With the trends that we're seeing as well, I'm quite concerned with that will be exacerbated. The number of people on the housing waiting list, the 1- and 2-bed property demand will increase. Housing prices are going up, rental prices are going up, the demand is going up. So people are less and less able to afford to own their own home, and we actually have a legacy of fewer private properties locally, so that shifts an increasing emphasis on registered social landlords. So that 2,700 figure is going to swell in the future, so we need to meet that rate of demand. I'm overstating the point, but it can't be overstated. I will focus now on the achievements that we've done locally, because I think there is a lot to shout about locally. We do work very well. We've got a dedicated housing and homelessness team who do a lot. We've provided significant investment in protection for services that support people through hardship and welfare reform. We've invested in third sector organisations that are battling on a ground level, and I think that's key, because a lot of these issues that we're facing are on a very real ground level basis and require that level response. We've invested in early intervention, and I'm again grateful to the leader for a continued sort of reference and continued focus on that, because this is exactly where we need to be to tackle the root causes of why people are finding themselves in hardship and ultimately finding themselves on the streets or homeless. With our rough sleepers, we've recently invested through the Supporting People programme in a pilot programme called Cornerstone. They're based in Caerphilly. They've had good success there. It is to work with our more acute rough sleepers, because we've been finding that there is a cohort of rough sleepers who are very, very complex, that they have particular needs that need really intensive intervention, and this is the sort of work that Cornerstone do. They're a ground level charity, which again I can't emphasise enough the benefits of that, because they actually get it. A lot of people working for these sorts of charities have been through the same experiences themselves, and there's no better way of helping somebody than actually understanding where they're coming from in the first place. So that's hopefully going to help over the winter period. We've got a rough sleeper group which meets regularly to monitor the rough sleepers that we've got in the borough and talk as a partnership about how we can better help them. And after this meeting, I'll be going to a winter Christmas period task group, which will be focusing on how we can coordinate local services, statutory and ground level, over the winter period, because we're finding that for a number of reasons there's particular issues over the Christmas and winter period which leave people at the end of the winter period in acute debt and acute crisis, and it needs that particular focus. So hopefully, in there with the challenges, we are facing up to those challenges, and we're doing our bit locally. We're really trying. I've forgotten to thank Elka and everyone else involved who putting this document together, because as hefty as it is, this is several months' work, I think, actually 7 months' work put into it. So it is worth reading. It is difficult to get through in many ways, but there's a lot in there to take. So yeah, I talked enough, but if there's anything left to be said, Elka, you're up.
Thank you, Councillor Daniels. It is a very long read, 68,000 words. Just a reminder that it is a statutory duty for us in Wales as local authorities to undertake a homelessness review and strategy, and I think that sort of pays some credence to the issue that we're all facing across Wales, but obviously England as well. As Councillor Daniels said, yes, the reviews have been a very in-depth piece of work, which Torfaen hosted and led on by the appointment of a seconded regional research officer to provide that really dedicated focus around undertaking the reviews. We recognise that there's benefit of working regionally around homelessness. We know that people don't just live or reside within localities, single localities. So I think we've really benefited by working with our partner local authorities in Gwent, so that we can fully understand the scale and pace of homelessness across the region, and also recognise areas where we can share good practice, and also there's some quite different variances, which is very interesting to discover. The reviews has put us in a good position in terms of developing the strategy. So we've got a draft strategy, which is Appendix 2, I believe, to the papers. And we tried to keep the strategy quite simple and quite pictorial, so that it meant a bit more for all who may wish to read and understand what our direction of travel is. I suppose we've mentioned some of the good pieces of work, and I'm really pleased to say that the reviews were very much led by engagement with service users who've received homelessness services and organisations working with people who are either at risk of homelessness or homeless. And we actually identified 25 themes, and the review uncovers and picks some of those themes and provides some in-depth information. I suppose testament now moving forward will be the regional action plan, which we've already developed across Gwent, and local actions as well, and how we will deliver to the strategy over the coming 4 years, because as it's now in statute that we need to develop local homelessness strategies and reviews, we also need to repeat this process on a 4-year periodic basis. So we'll be doing this again in a few years' time. So we've got 4 years, I suppose, to monitor the progress of the strategy and see where we can embrace some of the challenges that are really difficult in these times of austerity, and where people, as we know, are increasingly facing hardship and high levels of very complex and different support needs as we go ahead.
Any questions for Dave Rocker?
I must commend Cornerstone, because we had an incident in Glenavon 2 weeks ago where a gentleman was sleeping rough in the forestry, and within sort of 24 hours the gentleman was sorted out and looked after. Absolutely. Thanks for that.
Yeah. Before I ask a question, I'd like to comment on the tremendous work done by the officers, and particularly with respect to this Tolstoy tome. Unlike Tolstoy, it is cram-packed full of goodies rather than frills. I'd also like to pay some kind of tribute, and I hope I don't embarrass him. I mean, it embarrasses me to have to say this, I suppose, in many ways. But I think Dave Daniels has done a tremendous job in pushing this particular agenda through. But moving swiftly on, a question. The collaboration between Torfaen and other local authorities in Gwent, I'm interested in how that works, whether it is as successful as it appears to be, and I'm particularly interested in this notion of coming up with ways and means of accommodating transients from one county, from one borough to another. And on the back of that, it seems to me that there might be scope for further development, this collaboration, because it isn't just an issue in Torfaen. I have some understanding of the extent of the issue in Torfaen, and I'm assuming that it's no less of a problem in other counties as well. And the resource situation, or the situation regarding resources, is equally as palatable. So, one, can you expand on this notion of transience and how that works? And two, in your collective opinions, do you believe that this particular project of collaboration can be extended even further? Not further in terms of a geographical extension of this from the 4 counties in Gwent to a wider regional area, but the internal dynamics of that collaboration, can that be extended to the benefit of all?
In relation to the development of and the collaborative working to date, the review and strategy have been overseen by the homelessness leads and the Gwent strategy working group. That will continue. In relation to transients, there are a number of arrangements we already have in place with the neighbouring local authorities, not just Gwent, other authorities as well, where we cater for the needs of individuals or households who are moving in and out of county. So we do have sort of regular meetings around cases where we either come through, we adopt reciprocal arrangements for accommodating individuals, or we sort of monitor progress and movement. I think for me, key will be the regional action plan, where we've got a number of actions already identified in areas of work where we need to establish more collaborative working. We've already got some arrangements in place. For example, we've got a shared prison reablement worker, so people being discharged or released from prison. And we've got other initiatives like a regional gypsy and traveller accommodation officer, which works and links closely with homelessness. But I do think there are much more opportunities where we can collaborate further, and I think the detail of the review points out some really good areas of where we can do that, and that will pan out with our regional action plans as well. So some of the actions within those regional action plans will very much be done. We've put timelines. Some will be done in the first initial year, others will be a little bit further ahead, and one of our areas in particular is around rough sleepers as well. And how we better coordinate valuable resources to assist those who are sleeping rough.
Veronica?
Thank you. I found this fascinating read, linking through the different areas, particularly looking at the summary and then going on further into where you've got the more detailed information. I picked up notably the 16 to 24 age group and the fact that the males are a real problem and how to deal with it. And that seems to link in with page 119, 1.1.26, your youth homelessness and care leavers. A lot of the work that's going on, it looks as if this is already highly prioritised and you've got monies to go forward. What just concerns me at the back of my mind is the fact that this will be done on a 4-yearly basis, but presumably you've got a rolling programme going on so that you can see where you're actually able to make a shift in priorities. Am I right in thinking that?
Yes, absolutely, Councillor Crick. Young people and care leavers are one of the key themes that were emerging and one of the key areas that we have invested resources over recent years, and that will set to continue. I think there are certain areas such as the welfare reforms where individuals under the age of 35 can't afford accommodation. It's just one area where it just highlights again and exacerbates the issues for young people and care leavers accessing housing, but also making sure that there's suitable and very bespoke and specific support available for that client group. Absolutely, but it's something that will be monitored through the action plan. The review and the draft strategy will, once approved by all partners, will be submitted to Welsh Government. So Welsh Government will also be monitoring progress against our strategic objectives and how we deliver to the strategies going forward as well. So we may be doing this on a 4-yearly basis, but the key for me is about the regional action plan and the local actions and how we take those forward. So we'll be monitoring those very tightly. We will use the Strategic Housing Forum that operates within Torfaen to oversee some of the work, and we'll also be using the Supporting People Local Planning Group to oversee the work of the strategy. But similarly, we'll be making links with, well, we already have made links with the Regional Collaborative Committee, the Regional Partnership Board, and there's scope, I suppose, for the Public Services Board engagement as well.
Yeah, there's a whole, just to follow on from what Alka's saying really, there's a whole heap of processes locally that are very responsive to these sorts of changes. The Strategic Housing Forum being one of them. We've got the Welfare Reform Project Group, which has been in existence ever since the beginning of the Welfare Reform Agenda. We've got the Supporting People Review Group, which meets quite regularly as well, which is where the Cornerstone idea came from. The Rough Sleepers Group that's been constituted fairly recently, so we meet very regularly to talk about trends that we're seeing and particular issues that we're seeing, and we can demonstrate that we're very receptive to any changes that are coming along the line. And with the full rollout of universal credit on the horizon, I mean, we've got to be, because we had universal credit, we had full live service, we had universal credit, the full rollout for all new claimants this year. Last year's 2017 July, and that was restricted to new claimants and those that had made any significant changes to their circumstances. Very shortly we'll be seeing the migration of everybody who hasn't already transitioned over. So the wave that we saw last year, and it is reflected in food bank figures, it is reflected in rent arrears, all the sort of indicators that we really don't want to see, it is reflected in that. That is another wave that's coming on the horizon, and that is something we're going to have to be prepared for, and it's not scaremongering in the slightest to say that, because we've seen it borne out by ourselves, seen it borne out in Flintshire and everywhere else it's been rolled out. We're going to have to be prepared for that migration of everybody else. So in terms of being responsive, we're highly responsive here, and we will continue to be, because we have to be in the current climate. I hadn't even mentioned Brexit, so I don't want to in some ways, but that isn't, everything like that is a factor that we need to be responsive to. So, but thanks to Elka and the team for their work on it, because these are the people that are responsive and are working day in, day out to kind of tailor our services to suit the need that's out there.
My question was going to be on the impact of benefit reform. It's largely been answered, I guess, by Dan Daniels there. But obviously we were given £1,020, weren't we, from the Department of Work and Pensions to fund the impact of universal credit on our other institutions, the parts of our organisation that react to poverty crisis, in effect, which has been exacerbated by universal credit. Have we got any figure for the impact on demand on our services that has been created by universal credit?
Only we've got a conservative figure of about 500,000 at least. I mean, that is very conservative, given that we've had welfare reform for the past 10 years, and there have been wave after wave. The bedroom tax is long forgotten, but it is still very much hitting people quite hard. So there have been countless interventions that we've put in place that would be very hard to quantify, but yeah, it would very much exceed the £1,020 we were generously given, which, it is a real disappointment really, because we've put in a lot of efforts locally to bolster it's a safeguard against universal credit to actually make it work, because it's not in our interest, it's not in the interest of the most vulnerable for it to fail, because, these are our people, these are vulnerable people out there. So we've done absolutely everything we can, and officers and third sector organisations and even individuals in the community have worked damn hard to look after the most vulnerable. And it is just a bit of an insult, really, that is the figure that we're worth at the end of the day, because our efforts, our staff are worth, well, a million times more than that.
And of course, as you mentioned, other organisations as well, local housing associations have been affected by it too, of course. I think I value that sort of the scene that you've set, as well as the review itself, but the context that it sits within, the legacy, the lack of investment, benefit reform, things like that, and also that the challenges that we face in terms of local challenges as well, the lack of 1 and 2 bed flats and houses and things like that, and how we work to tackle the root causes, as well as trying to see how we respond, even if it is with one arm tied behind our back financially, how we can try and respond to those challenges. So thank you for providing both that report and the context within which it sits. Any other questions before we move to recommendations, which are on page 97, that we review and approve the draft Gwent Homelessness Strategy 2018 to 2022. Is everyone happy to support that? That's great, thank you. Thanks, Elka. We then move to item 12, which is on domiciliary care capacity. Bring in Richard first.
Thank you, Leader. This report shows a journey that we will take, a direction of travel, if you want. It's our political choice to go this way and support one of our key corporate priorities of supporting Torfaen's most vulnerable adults. I'd like to thank, in the first instance, Jill for this comprehensive report, which clearly reflects the current position we find ourselves in, and recognises the future pressures and focuses on those future pressures, and in particular to expand the service and assist in dementia care and complex care, and also valuing care workers. Nigel said earlier in his financial report about a health system as opposed to a health service, and this shows just a little snapshot of how social care contributes to that health system, and how foolish we are not to look at the whole picture. And it enables residents to stay in their home and out of hospital. In Torfaen, we're fortunate to work with partners and a number of care providers, but it should be recognised that of the 90% non-council care providers, 63% of that market is controlled at the moment is supplied by 4 providers, and Jill will update us during her little part of this report how fluid that is. It also provides us stability and support for care workers, and ties into other work we're doing with our partners in the region on a carer's pathway. And I'm very pleased to see the ethical care charter part of the recommendation at the end, because we are working towards that. We could run and put our hands up and say, yes, we are part of the charter, but I'm not a badge wearer and I'm not a card carrier. I don't think we should go for the charter until we are actually there. It's not a tick box exercise. It shows how we value and support our workers. So at the current moment, we are working towards, and when we get there, we'll shout out loud and proud that we are there. So I am pleased to see that in the recommendations there. So with that little flavour of the report, I'll let Jill pick up any technicalities therein.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. If it's all right with members, I'll just pick up on the key highlights in the report. As identified in the report, we actually support 520 clients in the community with personal care services, and that means providing 313,000 hours a year of domiciliary care. So it's over 6,000 hours a week at a cost of £5.5 million. So it's certainly a significant part of adult services work. As Councillor Clark has already mentioned, 90% of our support is provided by external agencies, and they're absolutely a key part of our delivery. We couldn't actually function without those agencies. 3 local providers, though, have actually folded in the last year, and I think it just gives that flavour of the difficulties that we face day to day. Our in-house services are concentrated in 2 main areas. It's a very small dementia service, which provides support for 30 clients with dementia, mainly at the end stages of dementia, so certainly they require that additional support, care and training to keep those people within their own homes and with their loved ones. And we also have an enablement service which provides 6-week support. We have 2 small teams that operate in the north and the south of the area. But as the report says, I think the difference there is obviously we have a sector in the external sector that provides that support, and they have 345 staff. Our own in-house staff, we have 59 part-time workers, mainly on 25-hour contract, so very, very small service. And that is kind of the direction that we've kind of, I guess, drifted into over a number of years. We have some significant challenges in the market, and I don't intend to go back through the population and the demographics and the complexity of the people that we support in the community. I think you are well versed in that data. But I guess in a nutshell, we do not have enough capacity in the market to support people as those numbers grow and their complexity grows. Even yesterday, I took a call to say another provider, which is a national provider, will cease trading on the 14th of December. And that means that we have to find 200 hours of domiciliary care per week to support 16 service users by the 14th of December. And that is the nature of of what we're working with. As you members, you will also be aware that we do not have any personal carers that we can call upon from, say, local authority residential homes. In that we do not have a bank of carers. We just have this very small, say, 59 part-time carers that we can call upon. So that the market changes daily. I mean, I guess, believe it or not, I'm thinking actually it's not too bad finding 200 hours for those number of people, because I think I understand there's something like 15,000 clients, vulnerable clients at this particular, it's been in the press, Allied Healthcare, that are ceasing trading, and I think they provide to over 15,000 clients in the UK, and in some areas in Wales, 90% of the local authority's business is with Allied Care. So when we're talking about, and certainly it's drawn my attention when we're looking at this about the Hoyner phrase, not too many eggs in one basket, and we need to do the planning around that and to ensure that we can respond to these kind of situations. Actually, our figure is relatively small, but I just hope that kind of gives you some indication of what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. The other pressures and the challenges we have in the system at the moment, I know that our brokerage team are currently trying to broker 22 packages of care. So on top of the 22 packages now, obviously we have to source additional 200 hours. Of those 22 people waiting for care, I have to say that this isn't 22 people sat in their beds at home with no support, so just to give you some reassurance of that. However, It is not acceptable that 7 people are in hospital waiting for care. We have 10 clients who are currently having support from our in-house reablement service or our emergency care at home service, which they need to, and a terminology, so that offload to ensure that they can find a long-term provider to support those people, to enable the enablement team and emergency care at home team to facilitate those discharges from hospitals. So there's kind of blockages in the system. We've got 3 care clients who are asking for a change of provider, but they are continuing with their provider at the moment. We've got 2 clients who need an increase in their package of care, but their current providers aren't able to provide that increase. Well, obviously we're in constant dialogue with providers, but again, to add to the pressures, we are in that time of year where, certainly for external providers, carers are leaving to take short-term contracts for the Christmas retail work. And because the majority of carers within the external sector on 0 hours contracts, that's what happens throughout the year. They go to seasonal work and then they drift back, but that's only short-term work, and then they'll go off again. So as I say, the market is very, very volatile. I've highlighted 3 options in the report, and the first option is do nothing. And I think from some of the points I've just raised, I think members, I hope members would agree that actually doing nothing, that first option, isn't feasible, because we will leave more vulnerable people without care, and not only without care, without any choice and control. More and more people want to remain in their own home. It's a message we clearly hear and want to respond to, but if we are unable to provide that care within their own home, the only alternative is long-term placements within residential or nursing care, which also comes at a cost as well. The second option highlights the potential to bring all that external support in-house and manage that in-house. And I would suggest that doesn't go without significant risks. In that, as I've already highlighted, that we've got around 350 members of staff working for external providers. So to be transferred 350 staff in, I think would bring its own risks and challenges, but also for me it's not a cost-effective option. And members of staff that work for the provider sector, you would think actually they would love to come to work for the local authority, but for some people, not all, that 0 hour flexibility actually works with their family life. So it wouldn't be just a transfer that service over and we would solve the problem. The third option highlights the potential to increase our in-house service. And I think it's really important to make a distinction between what our in-house service provides and what the very important role the external sector has. The external sector provide what I would class as generic care. So with non-specialist care, that doesn't mean that isn't without skills and the compassion that the external sector have, because that's part and parcel of their delivery. But the internal support services provide an enablement service, which this proposal was asking for you to consider about extending that service, because they go in and support people for a maximum of 6 weeks to enable that person to retain as much independence as possible. And you will see from the report that their success rate is extremely high, in that they continue to reduce packages of care. 50% of the packages of people they work with, their packages of care are reduced by 40%. which means that when we are then going out to that external market to commission that on a long-term basis, it means it's much more sustainable, because we're not going straight out to the market and trying to commission large packages of care. If we're actually commissioning the care which is really needed, there's more care to go across all the population, if that kind of makes sense. The other part of the proposal is that we would extend the dementia service. Again, in the report it highlights at the moment we are only supporting 30 people with complex dementia, and we know from the demand and the number of people that we have to turn down from that service that we have the demand there but not the capacity to respond. So we could actually look to see how we support those people in the north and the south of the borough. So that is kind of like the options as far as the expansion of the in-house service. But as I've already mentioned to members, the absolute importance of the external sector. The increase that we are suggesting in the in-house service actually only takes up, I think, from 10 to 14%. So there's still a significant amount of care that will be provided by the external providers. And what we want to do, as Councillor Clark has already highlighted, is to explore what the impact of, and work with providers and exploring the impact of introducing the principles of the Ethical Care Charter. We know that from the Unison paper, there are certain elements that have come out of that paper where it's difficult to recruit and retain staff due to the terms and conditions around not building in enough time for travel. It's about carers having to pay for their own uniforms, the hourly rate not a true reflection when you take that into account of what they actually receive. So there is a piece of work that's scheduled with our commissioning team working with providers, so they can work through all those principles and scope out what we can achieve, and always look about working towards ensuring that all those principles are met within the borough. There is also a point that I've included in the report under 4.6.4, which is around exploring working with the providers about a different commissioning mechanism as well. I think members may well be aware that we introduced a dynamic purchasing system, which is almost like an individual contract tender, which we commission with the external sector. And what we want to do is to work with the provider sector, now that we are in patch teams, to see if we can commission that care to be provided on a patch basis as well. That will give some stability to providers in that we would be looking at block purchasing, and so that would in turn give that security to the workers, and which may then lead to fixed-term contracts, hourly not zero contracts. So that is a piece of work that certainly that we want to explore with the external sector. So there's papers, I guess, is asking you members to consider that as an approach to secure the market and to stabilise the market. And welcome any questions.
Okay. I'd like to thank Jill for that report and the work that she's put in to this on top of an already very busy day job. I think this is something where, practicality and principle can align. She's spoken about lots of the practical concerns that we have about the current volatility of the market. But for me, it's in addition to that, it's the principle of the belief that services to our most vulnerable people are better provided in the most complex cases by people who are working as public servants within a public service ethos. So yes, the external sector is always going to be important. I don't think the option of bringing everything in-house in one fail swoop is either practical or sensible in terms of its impact because of what she said. But I think this demonstrates a a real sort of direction of travel that's based on both what we think is best in those complex cases. You mentioned dementia and enablement teams, how we can get those teams, wrapped as much as possible around people, both to, as you say, enable them so they're not so reliant on care, but also to maybe talk to other areas of the teams if those clients have got particular needs, and a more sort of holistic service there rather than something that's designed to fulfil a contract. So I'm certainly very keen on that. I'm also very keen on the approach that we're taking towards the Ethical Care Charter, not just sort of nodding our heads and signing up to it, but really looking at what we can take on board of that to re-fulfil it in its widest sense. In all ways puzzles me, and it's very revealing about our society that lots of the care workers that I know have gone off to get jobs in the retail sector or the catering sector because it pays more money than caring for some of our most vulnerable people. What does that say about us as a society, about what we value more? That we will pay people more to work in a fast food outlet or a clothes shop than we will to care for someone who's in a very vulnerable position. I think this report, is part of a wider sort of effort to try and value the work that our care workers do more and recognise how important the work that they do is. And I think this, option, if we can take it forward, really shows that we're alive to that, and we want to work not just to improve the situation for people working in the care service, but the situation for people who are reliant on the care service to maintain a decent quality of life. Very much thank you for the work you've done in this report, and I hope we can continue to sort of look into this as the situation develops, how we can, take this step and look at what else we can do as well to try and sort of respond to those concerns, that sort of principle and the pragmatic side of it as well. Anyone else want to comment before we move to the recommendations?
Just one small point. Whilst I understand and agree wholeheartedly with this notion that there's a big attraction for carers in the system to be seduced, if you like, by jobs outside that pay a little more, or in some instances a lot more. But I think that there is a small element of that migration from the care service outside that is to do with the degree of difficulty of the work, because we should never ever underestimate the tough job that carers have to do under incredibly trying circumstances, and if you superimpose on top of that low wages as well, then you've got a recipe for justifiable migration in many senses. The other thing I'd like to comment on is I'm glad that you've dismissed out of hand the notion of not doing anything, because that is not only morally unjust to do nothing, but in a practical sense it heaps up all sorts of problems for the future that will be a cost as well, so we can ill afford to travel in that for very practical reasons.
May I just add 2 comments to that? Thank you for that. Obviously, what we are aiming to achieve, that there's a two-pronged approach really. There's work going on from the Regional Partnership Board and through the Transformation team about how we develop a career pathway for the domiciliary care sector, and that is work being done across the 5 local authorities and the Health Board to try and make it more attractive and to retain staff. And that allegiance, as I was alluded to, around developing domiciliary care teams on a patch basis that will align with the social work teams. What we are hoping there that we can build that support in for the carers so that they will have a smaller caseload, which will also relate to that social work teams, or social work stroke OT, and everybody else that contributes to those patch teams, because I think, yes, the carers actually support those individuals, vulnerable individuals, very complex individuals, day in, day out, and they can be challenging and there can be dynamics, within families as well, and they need that ongoing support. So that is part of one of the things that we'd be looking at around the alignment between the patch-based commissioning and the patch-based teams.
Oh, that's good news.
I think that's a good point on which to sort of move to the recommendations, really, in appreciation of the difficult work that our caring staff do. Because, it is often very difficult. I've seen in personal circumstances how difficult that work can be when you're dealing with people. My own grandmother had dementia, and, it was her and other people going through that circumstance were very difficult to deal with, and the carers did a fantastic job in trying to make the last sort of couple of years of her life more palatable in a very difficult situation. I say that, I think, because a lot of that work that either our staff or people who are contracted by us do often goes under the radar, because it's not something that gets shouted about. It's very confidential work. It's work that goes on behind closed doors in people's own homes, and so people don't perhaps see it. But when someone comes up to me as a councillor and says, all I get for my council tax is my bins emptied, no, this is the kind of work that we get for our council tax as well. We get work that keeps some of the most vulnerable people alive, frankly, and if living in their own homes and with a decent quality of life, all the better. In a way, we can't shout about this work because on an individual level, because it is confidential and it is something that goes on behind closed doors, but it doesn't make it any less important, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be able to sort of thank the workers that do that for us. In saying that, can we move to the recommendations at the bottom of page 283, that Cabinet firstly agrees in principle to the expansion of the in-house domiciliary care service, agrees in principle and subject to the availability of funding to work towards the implementation of option 3, outlined above. Thirdly, agrees that scrutiny are fully engaged as option 3 is developed, and I think that's very important to bring the scrutiny in on this and to get their inputs. Fourthly, that we agree that a further report be brought back to Cabinet for final input following the input of scrutiny. And lastly, supports the scoping work of adopting the principles of Unison's Ethical Care Charter. Can we take a show of hands on that one? Thank you very much, and thank you, Jill. Brings us to the final item, which is item 13 on the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales report. And I'll bring in Veronica first.
Thank you, Anthony. This, as Anthony has just said, is the final report, and whilst it's a very brief report, that doesn't detract from the work that's done behind the scenes, which have led to a significant reduction in complaints to the Ombudsman, for which I feel Karen and her team should be commended. It's also noticeable that there's a lack of the need for investigation into the complaints, which is also something that is very notable here. And again, I would commend your staff for that. So if you'd like to go ahead, Karen, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Craig. The reason that I'm here is that we've had an annual letter from the Ombudsman. You'll recall that I provided you with quite a comprehensive report at the corporate performance session in September 2018. Since that time, the Ombudsman has also submitted an annual letter to us, to the leader, and asked that we formally bring that to Cabinet so that members and Cabinet are aware of the Council's performance. As you said, the number of complaints that we had to the Ombudsman dropped quite significantly in the last financial year, and the letter actually gave a breakdown of the figures, in that there were 3 to adult social services, 4 for children's services, 1 for complaints handling. That actually stated that it was a refusal to deal with a complaint. I'd just like to clarify that we would never refuse to deal with a complaint. We couldn't deal with something because it was going through safeguarding at the time, so that was the correct process to follow. There were 2 for education. That wasn't actually relating to our education service, it was relating to school transport, but that's reported in that way because the Ombudsman reported in that format. 4 for planning and building control, and there was 1 in relation to handling of data. And as Councillor Crick has already mentioned, there were actually no investigations, which I was very pleased to report. And I think that the annual report has already been shared with all of the service areas so that lessons can be learned. And I think, as I said, it's very brief, because we've already had the full detail of the content in the performance session. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
Only to thank you for the way that you deal with this subject area with great sort of skill, patience, and dedication. So I think that's the details in 4.3 are a testament to that, and to the approach that you take. So thank you. Are we happy to move to recommendations on page 286 then? That the Cabinet notes the annual letter of the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales as attached to Appendix 1 in the report. Show of hands. Thank you. And that concludes today's Cabinet. Sorry to everyone's had to listen to my sniffles today. Hopefully I'll be better at the next Cabinet.